So we will first hear from Tim Manning, who is the chair of the Response and Recovery Committee of the National Emergency Management Association and who is director of the New Mexico Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Mr. Manning. Now, press the button and then move it close to you.
Madam Chair.
All right.
Thank you. Madam Chair, good morning. Over the past calendar year, I have served as the NEMA representative to the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, National Response Plan Senior Interagency Steering Committee, which is overseeing the updates to the NRP. As I come before you today, NEMA has two significant issues related to the National Response Framework, the NRF. First, the current draft of the NRF must be reworked to reflect the true operational plan, or an additional document must be drafted immediately to replace the NRP. Second, the collaborative and cooperative process in rewriting that document has failed. On September 11, 2001, the federal government responded to the attacks using the Federal Response Plan and the Terrorism Con Plan. One of the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission and mandates included in the Homeland Security Act called for a consistent and coordinated national plan. Title V of Public Law 107-296 called for DHS, through the Undersecretary for Emergency Preparedness and Response, to be responsible for, quote, consolidating existing federal government emergency response plans into a single coordinated national response plan. The NRP was not perfect, but it was necessary. It included the creation of the Principal Federal Official, the PFO, which NEMA opposed, and the new term, Incident of National Significance. The current rewriting effort was given to FEMA in last year's Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act. FEMA is responsible for administering and ensuring the implementation of the National Response Plan, including coordinating and ensuring the readiness of each of the emergency support functions under the National Response Plan. Initially, NEMA was heavily consulted and actively engaged. NEMA was included on the DHS-FEMA Interagency Steering Committee, along with representatives of federal agencies, a representative from the Major City Police Chiefs Association, and the International Association of Fire Chiefs. In addition to the steering committee, NEMA provided over 20 representatives to various NRP working groups that spent weeks and months working as subject matter experts to provide input. These highly experienced state emergency management professionals participated in lengthy conference calls and flew across the country to D.C., often with very short notice. The input provided was based on lessons learned from past disasters and a vision for the future. Since the informal release of the plan in early August, NEMA has identified a number of critical issues that must be addressed before it can be recognized and accepted by state emergency managers as a viable replacement for the NRP or the FRP. We raise these issues as partners to ensure appropriate readiness. For the purposes of this hearing, our comments reflect the draft that was obtained in early August. DHS has released a final draft for public comment yesterday. In our review, it is not substantively different than the first draft, although some minor improvements have been made. NEMA is concerned that the majority of the collaboration, the input provided through the Interagency Steering Committee and the writing teams, was not included in this draft. Overall, the most critical issue for NEMA is the current framework is not a plan. The document reads more like a primer for state and local officials, which is a valuable resource. However, it is not the national plan for responding to disasters. This can be compared to showing up for a football game with an encyclopedia entry on who's involved and how the game is played, but without the actual playbook for the offense or defense. Essentially, only a small segment of the plan or the national team is being considered. The current framework is not sufficient for emergency responders and does not replace the previous NRP or the FRP. If the framework is intended to serve as simply a description of the system of response and an introduction to the players involved, an additional document, an actual operational plan, must be produced as well. The current framework has been clearly drafted from a federal perspective and does not appropriately address the planning needs of the state and local governments, nor does it follow commonly accepted emergency management planning principles, specifically unity of command. The current document maintains the principal federal official as operational. NEMA supported the deletion of this position as duplicative and confusing. If it is to persist in doctrine, it must be explicitly clarified as having no operational role or authority, as was stated in the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act. Finally, references to mitigation in the document are virtually non-existent, and recovery is only sparingly mentioned. The current draft does not specifically say what the federal government brings to the table in a disaster, and the framework essentially writes FEMA out of a job by downplaying the role of the organization and the National Response Coordination Center and the Regional Response Coordination Centers. The roles of the National Operations Center, the NOC, and the NRCC should be clarified and cemented. Operations and Coordination Center should serve as the central collection and coordination points. A goal should be the reduction in the number of disparate operations centers, not the proliferation of them. National doctrine for response should eliminate uncertainty. One should not be left to wonder whom to call or talk to in a time of crisis. The current framework references a number of other planning guides, hazard-specific annexes, and other resources that will have to be continually developed and adapted to support the framework. It is stated that these will be posted to websites, and the emergency response community will be expected to know which plan is in play at any given moment. Disaster preparedness is about preparing before a disaster occurs and not downloading the playbook in the middle of an event. If the first time somebody reads a disaster plan is when the event is unfolding, they have already lost. This concept must be reconsidered, not only to allow partner governments to participate in annex development, but to allow for the adequate timing to train, practice, refine the plans, and develop institutional knowledge. Finally, the collaborative and cooperative process in rewriting this document completely broke down when all of the input and advice from partners was put aside for an internal DHS rewrite. In April 2007, a month before the deadline, NEMA was informed that DHS needed an additional time to consider all of the input. In the following weeks, NEMA learned that DHS was undertaking a complete rewrite of the newly completed NRP in a closed-door process with no stakeholder input, working group involvement, or visibility by the steering committee. In early July, NEMA was informed that the nearly complete NRP was in fact being completely and substantively rewritten and would be renamed the National Response Framework. It would include significantly more detail and direction on the responsibilities and expectations of state and local governments, but written without the input or collaboration of those state and local government representation. The interim final draft was released yesterday to a limited 30-day comment period. To date, attempts have been made to open communication with DHS on the draft and the process. If the collaborative and cooperative process remains strained, we fear that the state and local governments and emergency responders will be hard-pressed embracing a plan that has not seriously taken their input into account. Again, NEMA appreciates the opportunity to testify and provide Congress with the comments on the National Response Framework. We hope that by outlining our current concerns, we can help DHS make an effort to engage stakeholders to address the shortfalls of the current framework and work together to strengthen the final product. Thank you.
Thank you very much.